Rob here, and I just finished disc 2 of the Legends of Horror box set, each disc having 2 films on them. This one has Mad Love starring Peter Lorre, and the second one is The Devil's Doll starring Lionel Barrymore. Both films came from MGM, and I've already reviewed the first disc, Mark of the Vampire and the Mask of Fu Manchu, so if you want to check my review out for those movies, you can. And the first film on the DVD, Mad Love, is not only my favorite of the 2 films on the DVD, but I think it's probably my favorite out of the whole set, and it's definitely the most unusual. It includes some of the best horror scenes on film, and during this period when the monsters were more like vampires and werewolves and man-made creatures, this features a monster in human form. Now, this movie, it came out in 1935 and is the second film version to come from the book The Hands of Orlac. The first version was done in 1924 with another horror icon, Conrad Veidt. And in this version, Peter Lorre is making his Hollywood debut as surgeon Dr. Gogol, who has this rather unhealthy obsession with stage actress Yvonne Orlac. He comes to see her practically every night to see her in her latest show, and when her husband, respected piano player and composer Stephen, injures his hands in a train accident, Yvonne brings him to Dr. Gogol, who replaces them with that of a dead knife-throwing murderer. And from then, Stephen seems to be falling into madness, and Dr. Gogol's infatuation with Yvonne seems to escalate. Now, Mad Love has great photography, like a lot of the other films in this set, but this one is probably because the director Karl Freund was a cameraman on a lot of other films, including Dracula and some German styles you might be familiar with, like The Golem, The Last Laugh, and Metropolis. This movie has great use of shadows, especially in the opening credits when Dr. Gogol's shadow is seen, and the camera zooms in on the characters from time to time to punctuate what's going through their head at that time. Peter Lorre, who I always think gives a tremendous performance in films, is perfect as the obsessed and jealous Dr. Gogol, although in today's world we would probably call him a stalker. I found him fascinating as well as disturbing, especially when his love for Yvonne becomes just too much for him. He brings some creepiness and sadness to the part, and I love the bizarre touches in the theater of horror scenes at the beginning of the film, although some were probably a little bit too much for 1930s audiences, but I think they could definitely be appreciated more nowadays because of films like Saw. And on the other hand, people I think might think this story is probably just a little bit too weird and twisted, but this movie did give me chills here and there. Now, besides Lorre, the rest of the cast is very top-notch. Colin Clive from Frankenstein is in here, as well as Francis Drake as the Orlacs. Both are very, very good. And Ted Healy, who is better known as the man who created the Three Stooges, plays a reporter, and I think he definitely does a better acting job here than in a 1930 film he did called Soup to Nuts, where he was a little bit more loud and tended to shout. But here, his character just seems a little bit bland and doesn't really contribute much to the plot. He seems kind of unnecessary. And people today might find Gogol's drunk housekeeper annoying after a while, even though this type of character was used as comedy relief in films from this period. But she really doesn't add too much to the plot either. Mad Love scares, I should say, are more psychological than with someone jumping out and scaring you. But of all the movies in this set, this one stayed with me. And the second film in the DVD is The Devil Doll, starring Lionel Barrymore. It was directed by Todd Browning, and Lionel Barrymore plays a wrongfully convicted man named Paul Levon who breaks out of jail to get his revenge on 3 former business associates. He escapes with a scientist who can shrink people to practically the size of little dolls. And Paul Levon decides to use the scientist's shrinking technique to get revenge on the 3 partners, and he sets up a shop as a front, a toy shop, and disguises himself as an old lady. Now, I enjoyed Barrymore's performance here more than I did in The Mark of the Vampire. He looked convincing, especially when his scientist friend is explaining his little project and finding all this just a little bit too hard to believe. He is also very good when he is asked to disguise himself as the old woman running the toy shop. And sometimes I found myself forgetting that I was watching Barrymore and thought I was listening to an old lady. I just liked how he spoke. And the special effects I found to be very good, and during one scene where a doll comes to life and robs a house, I kept wondering how the filmmakers pulled it off. Maureen O'Sullivan from MGM's Tarzan films is lovely as Paul's estranged daughter, and I found the subplot with them to be a little bit more interesting than the main revenge storyline. She's bitter about what she thinks her father did. Barrymore's assistant, who is the widow of the scientist, I found to be doing more of the hammy acting than Barrymore, with her facial reactions and the silent film acting with the theatrical stuff. Devil Doll is not as atmospheric as Browning's previous films like Mark of the Vampire, Dracula, or Freaks, but and then some viewers I think are probably going to find the plot to be just a little bit too incredible, but I thought it made a nice watch. So that's my review of the second disc of the Legends of Horror box set, Medlove and The Devil's Doll. So feel free to leave any comments about if you've seen either of the movies or about this video. I greatly appreciate it, and thank you very much for watching.